what is one thing that you wish other people knew about you and they don't?
One thing that I wish people knew about me is that I do lie on my bedroom floor and cry. And I say this because, I think it's very important for people to know that nothing is easy and nothing looks as perfect as it is, right? In a world of social media where everyone's putting their best face forward, where even our messy moments are so curated and they're so processed for people's consumption, I think we need to acknowledge that there's a lot of messiness in life, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of contradictions, there's a lot of grief that behind someone who looks so poised and put together and having the right words for every moment at any one point of time, there can be a lot of moments where all of these things unravel, right?
Hey everyone, it's Shulin. Before jumping into the episode, it would be really great if you could show After the Bar your support by leaving it a 5-star rating and following our series on Spotify. If you're tuning in on YouTube, remember to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. Enjoy the episode! Welcome to After the Bar. So this is a podcast where I speak with all sorts of lawyers, past, present, and future. And today we have a lawyer, and she's also a poet and a playwright. If you haven't guessed it by now, she is Amanda Chong. She's Singapore's answer to Taylor Swift because her recent play, Psychobitch, sold out in record time. Welcome, Amanda.
Hi. Hello, Shulin. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for finally saying yes. So, fun fact, I did approach Amanda because so many of you requested for her to be here today, and I asked her many times. It's been, I think, since 2022. And you said no to me very nicely, very gracefully. And I'm just curious why. One of the things which stood out was, I think you said, I don't know whether I have much to offer because I can't talk about my job.
Yeah, I think that was part of it, but I also was curious as to why any lawyers would want to hear from me, because I'm it's still a mystery to me what I can offer on this podcast, but I'm sure as we go along, you'll ask me questions and hopefully it'll be edifying to our listeners.
Yes, I'm sure. And many of our listeners are actually not only lawyers. There are housewives, there are NS men, there are people from the accounting world, bankers, all kinds. And yes, actually you have a pretty large fan base. So let's get started.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you something slightly controversial. And this question comes from a woman who's single, in her late 20s. She's also in Singapore, and she happens to be from our junior college, Chong. She wanted me to ask you, and feel free to let me know whether you're comfortable answering this, but basically she wants to know, Amanda, you're so eligible. How is it that you're still single?
Wow, I think this is really in keeping of the Taylor Swift theme, that this is the first question that you're asking me on this podcast. And I guess the short answer is that it's really a supply and demand issue, that's what I always say to everyone, right? And it's funny as well because I actually do get quite a lot of DMs on this topic. And people will just DM me, and it's really the whole range, right? Sometimes they're like aunties, like people I don't know who follow me on Instagram, and they're like, Amanda, I pray for you every day because I see that you are a very accomplished woman who might be intimidating to men, and I have no idea how you're going to ever find a husband. And I'm like, I don't know you, but thanks for your concern. I do appreciate it. And on the other side of things, right, I do have guys that I don't know sliding into my DMs. And one of the DMs I got before was, you went to Cambridge and Harvard. It's going to be very hard for you to find your cerebral match.
Oh my
And I'm like, bro, is this a pickup line? Am I supposed to reply to this? Why are you telling me all these things, right? It's interesting to me because I've received a couple of these DMs, right? And people always ask me this question. And I do think that, there is a reality that, unfortunately, I suppose when you're a certain kind of woman, men do find you slightly intimidating, and maybe I do fall into that category. But it's strange also, and I guess it falls into the way that I like to analyze gender dynamics, right? Because I don't think women find me intimidating, but I get that feedback from men who don't know me. And I guess, under that question of how is someone still single when they're X age, the fact of the matter is that I do know many brilliant, beautiful,
Yes,
accomplished women
absolutely.
into their 40s and 50s who are not
Absolutely.
married, right? And I wonder whether there's even a little bit of shame around that question, right? And I say this, interrogating it even for myself, right? Like, why is this a question that we ask of women and not really of men in a similar
That's true.
position, right?
That's true.
And I think maybe it's because women have always been validated by a relational identity, right? For so many years and centuries, it's always been a woman's role to be a wife and a mother. And when women don't hit those marks of those gendered expectations, sometimes it makes us feel less legitimate. It makes us feel invalidated by society. And I think I want to break that shame from around that, right? Even as it is something that I do struggle with myself, right? That I don't want to be validated by that,
Yes.
right? But whether I'm attached or not.
Yes.
Because I think at the end of the day, it is something that's not really within your control, right? I really believe that, if God wanted me to get married, I will get married, right? But until for now, I'm just living my best life, doing the
Yes,
things that I love to
absolutely.
do. And I don't believe that God will deny me a good thing for me.
Yes,
Yeah.
amazing. I love that answer. Wow, I was not expecting such a brilliant answer. And I must say, as a woman who is 41 this year,
Yeah.
who went to NUS Law, Hwa Chong, Nanyang, I am considered quite smart myself.
Of course.
But I must say, when I first approached you and I met you, and because you are Cambridge, you are Harvard, I did feel like I wondered if my level of ability to create conversation would match up to
No
your
lah,
expectations.
come on.
Really? So I was preparing, when I was going to our lunch venue, I was like, okay, better go and read up a bit more about Amanda. And I think maybe that's where that person was coming from. Although I think the way he said it, his delivery wasn't great. I'm sure now that you're her World Young Woman Achiever of the Year, you've won multiple awards, do you sometimes feel like people put you on this pedestal?
I think it's interesting, right? I think in Singapore, we often judge people a lot on where we go to school. And I don't think that's the right thing to
Yes.
do, because where you went to school, whether that's within Singapore or whether that's the opportunity to study overseas, that's really just a function of the opportunities that you had access to and the privilege that you've had, right? And I always think of privilege as being of a certain shape that allows you to move easily through the world. And the fact of the matter is that I was born into great privilege, right? My father, he lived in a one-room flat. He didn't have a bed to sleep on. He went to Hwa Chong. And he ended up, because he lived in Geylang Serai, so the commute was too long. So he actually ended up living in a CCA room, or the cleaner's room, on campus, because he couldn't afford the bus fare, right? And he had one uniform, which he had to wash and then wear again, right? And I went to Hwa Chong. And when I went to Hwa Chong, I lived in Bukit Timah, opposite Hwa Chong, and I got to walk to school and climb over the gate, right? Miss Morning Assembly, sorry. But that was just, in one generation, there was an amazing difference, right? From my father, who was the first person in his family to go to university, to me, because my dad became a lawyer. Our family was able to buy a house, a landed property along Bukit Timah, and I was able to go to school in Hwa Chong and RGS, right? And all of this is just a function of the fact that I am immensely privileged. And because I've worked with children who live in rental flats in Jalan Kukoh, I know that there are brilliant kids who are so talented, who just didn't have the same access to opportunity. So, that's why I don't think that there's any reason to be intimidated by where anyone went to school. And I suppose, to your question, because I just went on this giant segue, right? Because
I love it. I love it. I love the context. And I
Yeah.
can see why now you have such a huge heart for children from lower income families.
Yeah, but I think, to your question of, do people put me on a pedestal and how do I deal with that? I think I would like to think that most people who have a personal conversation with me would realize that I am not intimidating.
Yes, absolutely. So that first lunch just shattered all that illusion. So meeting you for the first time, I was apprehensive because
Yeah.
I wasn't sure
Yeah.
what to expect. And you would, I mean, I was a stranger to you back then
Yeah.
in 2022. But now I've seen the real Amanda. And that's the whole point of inviting you here, because I really want people to see the other layers to Amanda, you know, beyond the poet, the playwright, and the lawyer. So I think the other question I wanted to ask you is, when you've grown as a woman, as a person, and now that you're this multi-hyphenate and you have all these awards, do the people who have known you all the while and grown with you, do you see them treating you differently?
The thing, right, is that I am incredibly blessed to have a group of girlfriends that I've known for almost my entire life who are just genuinely so supportive, right? And I think, yeah, that's just so precious to me, where you see your friends who just support everything that you do, right? Your successes, or when you go through drama in life, they are there for it. And yeah, and I think that's probably one of the greatest blessings that I have. Yeah, so nobody treats me differently or out of those who are my core group of friends.
Amazing. Okay, and that's such a blessing.
Yeah, I mean, they're there to support all my shows, you know. Anything that I do, they will be like there with the flowers.
Yeah. And they've seen, I'm sure they've seen, and I've seen as well, many different facets to you.
Yeah.
There is the Cui OL on your IG stories. So for the ones who don't understand Cui OL is office lady. How do we say Cui?
Cui is like a hot mess.
Hot mess.
That's how I explained it to Americans, because they're like, what is Cui?
Yes.
And then I explained it in many, many different words. I was like, oh, you know, it's someone who is like always rushing around, doing makeup in the car, right? You know, like the handbag is filled with junk. It takes them like ages to find their keys in their handbag, and all the receipts, the half-eaten burger comes out, right, when they're digging.
You're describing me.
Yeah, so then when I explained this long-winded explanation to this American woman, she was like, oh, you mean it's like a hot mess concept? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with that. The next time, it's a hot mess concept. That is Cui.
Hot mess office lady. And as well as this well put together, you know, overachieving lawyer, very, very talented poet and playwright. So I've seen many facets, right? And I want to ask you, what is one thing that you wish other people knew about you and they don't?
I think one thing that I wish people knew about me is that I do lie on my bedroom floor and cry. And I say this because, you know, I think it's very important for people to know that nothing is easy and nothing looks as perfect as it is, right? In a world of social media where everyone's putting their best face forward, where even our messy moments are so curated and they're so processed for people's consumption, like, I think we need to acknowledge that there's a lot of messiness in life, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of contradictions, there's a lot of grief that behind someone who looks so poised and put together and having the right words for every moment at any one point of time, there can be a lot of moments where all of these things unravel, right? And actually for me, when two women separately who I admire tremendously, you know, really leaders in their fields, incredibly polished type A overachievers, when they told me privately that they lay on the floor and cried, I felt so seen, because I was like, oh my gosh, you know, like even these people lie on their floor and cry. And because that's what I do, right? And it could be for any reason, right? Like, and I think that's the reality, right? That we all struggle with self-doubt. We all have those moments where everything that we planned for and tried to control didn't turn out the way that we expected. And then we grieve those moments, we feel our feelings, and we take time to process it.
Yes.
You know, and even something as simple as writing a poem, right? Like, I have to say that, you know, every time I write a poem, there's always this stage where I'm like, am I a writer? I think I've forgotten how to write a poem. And I'll just lie on my floor and stare into my ceiling, and sometimes I'll cry because it's like, how can I call myself a writer when I don't know how to write a poem? In fact, I had one of those moments earlier this week. And every time before I write a play, I'm also like going through that same process of like, how do I even like get into this? Like, why am I here? You know, how can I be a playwright? I don't know how to do this, right? And it's funny because, like, yes, I published an entire book of poems.
Yeah, which is right here. Yeah. Thank you for giving me a copy.
Yeah, and I've written like 3 plays. But I think for me, part of the reason why I love creating art so much is because there's that element where it feels so outside of your body and so outside of your control, right? Where, to me, and I think a lot of artists feel this, that there's this element of divine inspiration, right? Where you're like, help me to create something true and beautiful and that says something to the world, right? And I think that's the process I go through each time.
Amanda, in a recent interview, you said that writing poetry is literally you sobbing into the floor of your bedroom, and it's a very solitary process, versus being a playwright where you're with the audience and you can actually hear your audience crying along with you or laughing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was one of those like, or psychobitch, So are you enjoying being more of a playwright in this season?
Yeah, I think playwriting is one of those things that I never imagined that I would ever step into. And I only got into it in 2021. So that was the year I was 32. And I think it is one of those things where, you feel like you were always created to do it, but you never knew exactly how you would end up doing it. Because I was in RGS Drama Club, in Hwa Chong, my CCA was drama. Even in uni, I acted in plays. But I kind of felt that like theatre is such an intensive activity. I wouldn't attempt to act in a play while having a full-time job as a lawyer, right? And it's very difficult also to enter the theatre scene because each production requires so much investment. But I had this brilliant opportunity that found me, and it really found me in, I think it was towards the end of 2020 when a producer from the Esplanade, Glenda, she just started contacting me and she asked me to write something for the Esplanade, and I thought that she was really, I was like, this is impossible. The last play I wrote was in JC. Like, why are you asking me to do anything?
Wow.
And then she was very persistent because I didn't answer her at first, but she actually even got my number and started WhatsApping me.
Wow.
And she said, we really want you to do this, right? And it's so incredible because I had no track record of writing anything for the stage, right? Seriously, the last play I had written was for Hwa Chong Drama Fest when I was in G1, right? That's my experience of playwriting. I mean, I love theatre, but
Yes.
I thought it was incredible that a producer like her would see that I could do something like this and see the potential in it, because she said she wanted to create a work about feelings and she wanted it to be family friendly and to create conversations between children and their parents and to reach out to all ages on this topic of feelings. And she actually heard me speaking on a podcast, and from that, she just felt that I could do this because, as a poet, I got a lot of feelings, right? As I said, I cry on the floor all the time. And so she paired me up with this fantastic composer, Julian Wong, who's now a really good friend of mine.
Julian.
Yes, he's incredible.
I watched his Don't Call Me
Mr. Marikita. Yes.
I watched it 3 times.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, you're a Julian Wong fan.
Yes.
I'm a fan as well. And
Yes.
when she first put me into this Zoom meeting, right, with the director Edith Pedestal and the composer Julian Wong, I still didn't know what I was there for, because I thought, okay, maybe you want me to write a couple of poems, run workshops for kids. I didn't realize she wanted me to write an entire play. So I ended up coming up with this concept, the Feelings Farm, because to me, feelings are landscapes that we go through, and different people see it differently. We're changed as we go through the landscape. It's never the same way twice. I mean, if you enter into sadness again, it might feel totally different, right? Because there's a lot of shifting going on. And I really wanted these landscapes to be very accessible to Singaporean children, because ultimately I create my art for a Singaporean audience. So I came up with a field of fear, with lalang, right? A swamp of sadness, like, the mango swamp that you see in Sungai Buloh, and longkang of loneliness, because I think loneliness was a feeling that a lot of children had to deal with. I mean, not just children, we had to deal with that during the pandemic. And also difficult feelings to talk about, right? Like jealousy, for example, which I feel, is something that is hard to admit, right? But it's so helpful when we admit it, because then we can deal with it and address it at its root, right? And I wanted people or children and families to have all these language and metaphors to be able to express their feelings. And I wanted the work to also be centered around very true experiences that Singaporean children go through, which is why we did workshops with children of different socioeconomic statuses, with children with disabilities, all to come up with what exactly are children struggling with. And the play addresses that, difficult topics like divorce, dementia, having a grandparent with dementia, loneliness. So I really just wanted to give children that language and speak to them with dignity. And the thing that was so surprising to me was that, yes, it was created for children to easily understand, but to me, right, the best work for children speaks to the inner child in all of us.
Absolutely.
And so there were a lot of people who went as adults unaccompanied by children to watch this musical at the Esplanade, because Julian Wong obviously...
Unaccompanied by children.
Yes.
I like what you said.
Yeah, seriously. It was like for them to have their own therapy session, you know. And this play is actually coming back in October at the Esplanade.
Oh, I definitely must bring my husband, an adult, as well as my kids.
Yeah, so I think, from that experience of working with these amazing creators, and it obviously felt, when I was in the Zoom room with them, I felt completely like an imposter. I was like, this is crazy. You're asking me to work with these people who I love and admire because I'm their fans. I love Edith Pedestal's work. I love Julian Wong's work. I knew their work even before I was put in the same room as them. And, it was like a huge struggle, like the Argis girl in me came out. I went to the SB Library, borrowed all the books to mug how to be a playwright because I'd never written a play before. I signed up to a masterclass and I was watching the masterclass a course on how do I write a play.
Yes.
And because this play was not just any play, like it was in the Esplanade Theatre, it had like a huge budget, right? And I think it was a little bit of a megalomaniac streak for me, even being a playwright, because I realized that I could just write The Children Sail Away in Paper Boats in the Swamp of Sadness. And then they construct paper boats, like 20-meter paper boats to fill, the Esplanade stage.
Wow.
And I was like, this is insane. Like, in what universe am I allowed to do this, right?
Yes.
And I think more than that, it was also the joy of working with other artists, right? As I said, that being a poet is just me and my feelings, but being in the theatre is like me and my feelings and everyone making everything better, right? Putting in their own artistry, the different designers, the different, the actors, and the director, the composer, everyone working together and making an idea even better. Mm-hmm. So I really got addicted to that because ultimately I'm a theatre fan and sometimes I just like to be in this rehearsal room as an intern. I'm like, just treat me like an intern. I'm here to like watch all of you work because I have such admiration for good acting and for good direction.
Yes. Yeah. And I can so relate. I'm sure many people listening to this can relate to that feeling of you have to overcompensate because you feel underqualified to do
absolutely.
something. I mean, even before coming here today, I was mugging last night, like watching all the YouTube videos of Amanda Chong, making sure I've missed nothing. I mean, you say it's the RGS girl in you, then for me it's the Hwa Chong Nanyang girl in me. I was like, okay, I need to make sure I have all the questions. Am I missing anything? So and I've done so many of these interviews.
Yeah.
I can understand why you felt inadequate because you hadn't done a play at that time.
Yeah.
Now I want to talk about Psychobitch.
Yes.
Okay? That title, wow. And that show was completely sold out. And the reason why I say you are like Singapore's answer to Taylor Swift is because it felt like a confessional play. And when I was watching the play, I had no idea a one-woman show. Okay, first of all, I didn't know it was a one-woman show.
Right.
It felt like, on Friends, the sitcom, right?
Yes.
There are a lot of those one-woman or one-man plays. So I was like, wow, okay, this is how it feels like. How is this one woman going to capture our attention for the whole hour, right? But it was amazing. It was beyond. And then there were people queuing up for standing tickets. How do you feel about the success of Psychobitch? And how much of it were you inspired by Taylor Swift?
Well, I think it's right for you to point out that connection with Taylor Swift insofar as I think both of us, we write a lot from our personal lives, right? So like in my book, Professions, the entire thing is really about my relationships, right? Mainly, I think relationships in my 20s, but also with my parents, with friends. And I mine a lot of my personal life and the feelings that I have from going through certain things and put it in my work, right? And sometimes I really just directly steal from conversations, meaning that, if somebody said something to me in a conversation, I put it in quote marks in a poem, right? Like, for example, there's this poem here that begins in quote marks, "You look like the girl I loved for so long." And it's called The Way Only Recent Strangers Do.
Yes, I love that.
the phrase, "you look just like the girl I loved for so long," that was legitimately actually what an ex-boyfriend said to me when we met a year after we broke up. Yeah, and I thought, wow, that's a great line. But I mean, obviously the rest of it wasn't great lah, right? So then I have to make my own beauty out of it by writing a poem, right?
Yes.
And I think, for me, Psychobitch came from a very, very true premise, to educate folks who don't know what Psychobitch is about, Psychobitch begins, you meet Anya Samuel, her level of excellence is perpetual, her level of chill is nil. So I think it describes perhaps me and you.
Yes.
No chill.
Yes,
You're
no
striving to be excellent all the time. And the audience meets her when she stumbles with all her barang into her tech CEO fiance's office, where she has prepared this slide deck to explain the 4 times she cried in public in the course of their relationship. Because he thinks that she is too emotional, so he listed out the 4 times, dates, locations, of where she cried in public and asked her to explain herself. But because she's this overachiever, she obviously has to harness all her professional expertise because she's a journalist. And she creates this amazing PowerPoint presentation, which has infographics of her menstrual cycle, including animations of a bleeding uterus. And this is all just part of justifying herself and proving that she is not a psycho bitch, right? And this premise, because people are like, wow, that's a very good premise. Amanda, you have a really good imagination. I'm like, no, man, this happened to me. In my 20s, I did have a boyfriend who asked me to explain the 4 times I cried in public. And so I did. But because I'm a lawyer and not a journalist, I didn't have the expertise to come out with like a super, zunged slide deck. Instead, I created a 30-page submissions, which were color-coded.
Wow.
And it did also include, of course, infographics of my menstrual cycle.
I wouldn't expect anything less. And has that ex-boyfriend been in touch with you ever since?
Oh, no, of course not. Yeah.
And with your confessional style of poetry, playwriting, have you ever wondered if there might be backlash from the people you write about or you are inspired by?
Well, you see, right, this really is where it helps to be a lawyer, right? You know exactly where the boundaries are when you tap into your own personal life. I mean, what I would say is that, so yes, it's true, Psychobitch came from that premise, which really did happen to me, but the content and obviously the characters in Psychobitch, they're fictional or they're drawn from other women's experiences. Because in creating that play, I spoke to, a lot of friends, a lot of people I met all over the world, because what I wanted to unpack was this phenomenon of why do we regard women's emotionalism with a stereotype of being a psycho bitch, right? I think there's so much baggage in there, right? And it comes from even the etymology of the word hysteria. Hyster means womb, right? And so when women are emotional, it's like, oh yeah, she's crazy, right? Or she's a bitch. Or of a woman even in like a professional setting, right? If they're assertive, they can come against all these stereotypes of being a bitch. And so I really wanted to unpack all of that, but against the backdrop also of a very universal story of someone who really struggles to find love and to realize that she is worthy of love, right? Yes. And I wanted to knit all of that with stories of family, of, this character's own childhood trauma that causes her to behave in a certain way in a relationship. And of course, to examine the gender dynamics that she has with this tech CEO boyfriend. And that's the inspiration for the boyfriend character. That kind of AC guy, water polo player, right? But currently now slightly past his prime, but also like he still has a little bit of that swag from back when he used to be in the school canteen and the girls used to giggle at him, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just thought it would be hilarious to have Anya, the female protagonist of Psychobitch, embody all the mannerisms, right?
Yes.
Like all the man-spreading. And there are certain moves that guys make, which I call man moves, which kind of subtly assert the patriarchy, but are also kind of hot. And you're like, oh, why am I finding it slightly hot, right? So I wanted her to do all of that on stage.
Yes.
That was just part of the humor for me. Yes. And also part of interrogating those gender stereotypes. It's like, why do we feel like kind of attracted to that as straight women when like, it actually is like semi-toxic?
So true.
Yeah, so I just love kind of looking at all these experiences because I feel like women, we all have those moments, right, where our emotions just come out, right?
Absolutely.
And we feel like we have to apologize for it.
Yep.
Right. And I want to interrogate why we feel like we have to apologize for being ourselves.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And when I was watching the play, a little bit more on the play,
Yeah.
I felt seen and heard, even though I didn't experience that. Like,
Yeah.
it was not a familiar story. However, the feelings were familiar. The fact that it was so raw, so authentic, has a universal appeal. And I think there was an experience where Anya had to see a property.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was denied the opportunity to view a property
Yes.
because of her skin color.
Yes,
So I
yes.
thought that was so powerful because as a Chinese Singaporean, we're in the majority.
Yeah.
We sometimes forget what the people in the minority experience on a day-to-day basis. So I think watching that made me and everyone in the audience, I remember hearing a lot of sobbing and also gasps. We were
Yeah,
like, wow.
yeah. Yeah, and that really came from the fact that I set out wanting to write a play for my really, really dear friend. I mentioned that I had friends who were always there supporting me. Sindhura Kalidas,
Yes.
the fantastic actor in
Yes.
Psychobitch, she's one of those friends. And I just have so much respect and admiration for her since we were in Sec 1 and her abilities on stage. And I know she's the kind of person who can make you cry and make you laugh. And so I really wanted to just work
Yes.
with her. And therefore, Anya Samuel is a Tamil Christian woman. And I'm really indebted to, Sindhu for giving me those experiences, for really helping me understand more about this particular cultural context and situations that a Tamil woman in Singapore might find themselves in. I'm also
Yeah.
indebted to a whole bunch of my other friends who are Tamil or Tamil
Yes.
Christian or South Indian Christians who helped me, read the script and gave me all those references because there was just no possibility of me getting it right otherwise, right?
Yes.
And I obviously can't say that I got it right. I just wanted to put some facet of that experience on stage.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I trust you've been enjoying this episode so far. We'll dive back into the conversation after this very short break. Don't forget to help us make a much bigger impact by giving us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a thumbs up on YouTube. Thank you so much. And now it's time to get back to the rest of the episode. So some of the best ever love songs are written by people who experience tremendous heartbreak.
Yeah.
So Adele, Gwen Stefani, like one of my favorite songs, Don't Speak, and obviously Taylor Swift. And my question here is, when you had to write Psychobitch and you had to revisit past painful memories, was that difficult for you?
I think so much time had passed since, the breakup that inspired this play that it was actually very fun for me to do it. Because I actually do believe that, at least for me as a writer, and when it comes to my poetry as well, and my book is really filled with like my heartbreak poems. But I think there's this quote, I believe it's from Wordsworth, about how poetry is emotion recollected in tranquility. And tranquility is the key point, right? When you're going through like the ups and downs, the throes of the emotions in the moment, and when it's still really affecting you, I don't think it is actually possible to form any kind of coherence from a traumatic incident. But when you have some distance away from that traumatic event, I think that's when art can be just incredibly healing, right? So for me, what I always see in the way that I write poetry is that there's this opportunity to be revisionist about your past, even, of look back with new eyes at something that happened from a different perspective or a more empowered perspective. For example, Taylor Swift does this in All Too Well 10-minute version, right? Where we know the All Too Well, the first version of it, where it was a much more truncated version. And when you look at the 10-minute version of All Too Well, it has all the gravity of a woman more than 10 years later looking back at how she was treated by an older man when she was like 21, right? And you can even sense that rage and indignance in her performance, where she's like this mama bear who is like protective over that younger version of herself, right? Wow. Why am I segueing into Taylor Swift again? But seriously, right? Like, I'm going to answer your question, okay? I'm going to get there. But I have to say that Taylor Swift, I actually teach her when I teach confessional poetry. I always talk about her work, right? But I mean, all to say that when it came to Psychobitch, all of that time had passed already.
Yes.
And even when I was looking at some of the text messages that I had exchanged, right? Because actually I'm very inspired by my WhatsApps. That's why I love WhatsApp because it has the receipts for everything and all the ridiculous things that you say in the moment or the conversations that you have. So I'm looking at all these conversations and I'm like laughing because it's so funny to me at how I'm communicating with this guy about feelings, but he is throwing such corporate language back at me, and you see that in Psychobitch, right?
Yes, can you give some examples of the corporate language?
Stuff like there's an axiomatic divergence between us, or let's reframe, it's a capacity issue on my part. This conversation is generating more heat than light. I prefer asynchronous communication, stuff like that. And I'm like, wow, I love that. That's so funny, right?
Who talks like that? Oh my gosh.
No, but you see that in the way that the character talks in Psychobitch as in her boyfriend, right?
So, wow. So I understand now why people thought, oh, Amanda, you are so imaginative. Yeah, but actually, you didn't imagine this.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I riffed off it, right? There's a seed of truth, and then I turned it into something that was actually funnier, right? I don't think what happened to me was that funny, but I just amped up the comedy. So I think the thrill of writing plays for me actually is that it takes me into this paradigm of humor, which I don't really access when I write poetry, and that's usually like me and my feelings, right? But when I write for the stage, I can kind of find all these moments which are actually super hilarious, and watching the audience laugh with me, I tell you that's the best validation, I mean, I don't want to spoiler the play because it's going to get restaged at some point, but there were certain lines which really happened to me. And at that moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, is this a bad thing? Like, why do I feel so sad that this person has said this to me? Yes. But like the audience they're heckling, they're like, what? How can this guy say this? Right? I'm like, oh, I'm so validated,
Yes.
And
okay, but good that you say don't spoil it because I was gonna dig more into it. So we'll stop here about Psychobitch. And okay, for the people listening in, including for myself, even though yes, I'm a former lawyer, if let's say we want to write something confessional, but we're worried that maybe that person might sue us, what are the lines you can safely color within, and then
Right. Well, I think a huge piece of it is not to reveal the person's identity, right?
Of course.
Yeah. And I think, and not to claim that there's any truth behind it, right? Like, Psychobitch is a work of fiction. It was inspired by a seed of what happened or to me, or that from the framing of it, but it certainly is not like a blow-by-blow account of what happened to anybody. It's completely fictional.
It's like a combination of experiences from various places.
And the character of Anya Samuel is also not me, right? I'm not a Tamil Christian woman living in Singapore, right? I don't have the trauma that she went through. And even when I write poetry, I think poetry is an incredibly brilliant form for writing confessionally, because there's a lot of ways that there's a lot of plausible deniability behind poetry, because even when you say you address a poem to a you, or you say you have the point of view of I in a poem, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's Amanda Chong speaking, right? It's a persona that you put on when you write a poem. And so I think that gave me a lot of freedom to write very honestly and vulnerably about things that actually happened to me. But I would say that it was not really necessarily an instinct that was natural to me. In fact, I had a lot of worries, exactly as what you said, that people are going to pick up my poetry book and try to read it like some sort of tabloid and be like, oh, this poem is about who? Because there's a way that if, Singaporeans all know each other, right?
Yes.
Or we fear that, it's like school canteen vibes, right?
Yes.
But the thing is that a lot of that is just baggage, I feel. And I was really encouraged by my mentor, the Singapore poet Cyril Wong, who is an amazing confessional poet. And he told me, to always be true and emotionally honest in the art that you create. And I think that's my guiding principle, right? Because I think that actually that's the gift that you give your audiences when you are emotionally honest. So I would say that while not all my work is based on something that happened to me, everything is emotionally honest. And I think the gift is the vulnerability. And what I found actually is that the more specific that we are about our experiences, it's a bit of a paradox because the more that connects universally with people. And I think the job of a poet, of a writer, is really to describe the wound in as specific terms as possible. And people realize that, hey, we share that wound, and this is a very common human experience. And then you feel less alone, right? And I mean, one of the most vulnerable poems I wrote in Professions was called Monsoon Girls. And it's about a very close friend of mine who actually took her own life in her mid-20s. And it was a very difficult poem for me to write. And I do remember crying a lot, when I wrote it and just being like, how am I going to even put this into words? But that was a poem that several people have contacted me over the years to say that really helped them. And, it helped them to speak about mental health. It helped them to speak about suicide. It helped them to really address all these griefs, right? And there was even a teenager who showed me how she put that poem on her wall. And that meant so much to me because my friend who I wrote that poem for, Michelle, as teenage girls, we used to take poems we really loved and put it on our wall. And I was like, that's the best way I feel that I could have remembered her, right?
Yes.
And the poem is dedicated to her in my book because she was the one who read all my earliest work.
Wow, that's incredible. I read your book and thank you for gifting it to me. And Monsoon Girls stood out to me, but I did not know the significance behind it. Yeah. Okay, thanks for sharing that. I think all your work, why it touches people's hearts is because you're prepared to be raw, authentic, although the word authentic is bandied around so much, but it's sincere. It's very sincere, it comes from a sincere place, true. And do you sometimes find that there is a tough balance? Because yes, at the same time, you want to be raw, authentic, true. So for me, sometimes I struggle because I wonder if people can take it. Like, am I too much? Do I really need to bear it all? Because sometimes, or maybe society sometimes dictates that, maybe just tone it down a bit. Yeah, don't be so loud. I am very loud. I've been told don't lean so near to the mic even. But yeah, I'm curious, like sometimes do you feel like you have to curate a little bit and not be completely 100% raw?
Well, as a poet and playwright, I think I absolutely don't have to be restrained in any way. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? Because there is so much that your audience receives from vulnerability. And actually, I don't think that there's any point in beginning this journey to create art if you're not prepared to be true, right? Because I feel that every time I'm writing, I'm trying to create something that is true and that is beautiful and that will speak to people. And if I want to achieve that, the minimum I can contribute is my own honesty, right? And that's why I think everything that I put out has a lot of heart in it, there's a lot of me that goes into it. But I think that it's precisely because I have this outlet that I am able to be very, I guess,
there's no filter.
In my art. I mean, obviously, as a lawyer, you won't see me sobbing in my office, right? And obviously, like there are different modes that we go into for different things as the situation calls for it.
Yes.
But I think even as a lawyer, I do strive to be connected to my feelings. I do strive to be empathetic. I do strive to be an active listener. I think those values transcend both. And I do always strive to be authentic as a person. I think that's a very important value to me. I mean, you're right, it's probably bandied about a little bit too much, but I think the way that I see it is living with integrity, meaning that what you see is what you get. And that if you say something, you mean it, and you are not playing any games.
Yes.
And I think that the struggle here is that there are going to be people who assume that you are duplicitous or that you have different intentions from what you communicate. And it can be extremely disappointing and heartbreaking even, right? When you are just striving to do your best, and someone reads completely different intentions to you. But I think that when you live personally with integrity, it gives you that comfort to know that, okay, they just read me wrongly and I'm not going to be able to change their mind, and you are surrendered to that. But at least you know that you tried your best, right?
Yes.
By always living your life in a principled way.
That sounds like could be material for another poem or playwright. Because I feel like that too.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you feel misunderstood.
Yeah.
Like, you have the best intentions, but they don't land the same way.
Yeah.
People make a lot of assumptions.
Yeah. And I actually think that just goes to the broader theme of how we don't have control, right? And I feel like this is something that I'm learning a lot in my 30s. And I think we started off this, right, even with the theme of whether one is going to get married or not, that I think we need to come to accept that actually a lot of things are not within our control in life, right? Yes. And it can be the kind of realization that is very difficult to deal with when you are someone who loves to control everything.
Yes.
Or, for a long time in your life, you've felt that you've managed to control things and control outcomes by trying your best. But we all have to reach that point of reality check when our best efforts meet with like a total disaster, or our best efforts are completely misunderstood. And then we realize that, hey, at the end of the day, there are certain things that we would never be able to control, including what people think about us, or including, an outcome of a certain thing that you put a lot of effort into. And we just have to accept it, right?
Acceptance.
And that's actually resilience, know?
Yes. Self-acceptance too. Self-forgiveness, self-compassion.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you can then extend that to others.
Yeah. Because I do think that, I have a lot of women friends, right? And we talk a lot about feelings all the time. And what I notice is that we are so quick to extend grace to all our friends, right? We're so kind to our friends. It's like, oh, you do something that like is frankly like completely stupid, right? And then your friend will be like, oh my gosh, don't let this define you. This is not who you are. It could happen to anyone. But then the moment it happens to us, our self-talk is completely critical and completely condemning, right? I mean, sometimes it can be something like, oh, I said something stupid in the meeting and I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone thinks I'm a dunce, right? Let me just like quit my job now. It's very easy to spiral, right?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. I can so relate to that. Let's talk about your work. So we've spent a lot of time talking about your artistic career.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your legal career. Because you've always known you didn't want to be a corporate lawyer. So you started off as a sexual crimes prosecutor, and you also... I think you were looking at the law surrounding human trafficking on a global basis. And I'm very curious because outside of work, you are so passionate about advocating for women and also children's rights. How do those intersect?
I think it's, again, this is like the way that I was able to live my life in the most authentic manner is by being a lawyer in the public service. I think I'm the kind of person who really needs to see an alignment of the values that I believe in directly related to everything that I do. So even my Harvard thesis was also about migrant women in Singapore who are married to Singaporean men of lower income. So the title of the thesis was Migrant Brides in Singapore, Women Strategizing Between Family, Market and the State. Because this particular group of women, they are not able to, or it's not easy for them to naturalize to become PR and citizens because of their husband's income level. And there was a whole host of ways that made them more disenfranchised, right? Like even though technically the same kind of law applies to them, the way that they're able to access those laws would differ because of their immigration status. And doing that project really, as part of that, what I ended up doing was interviewing 12 women who were from that profile, and they were actually all women that my mother worked with, and they're my mom's friends, right?
Wow.
So they're all women who are married to low-income men. Some of them were HIV positive, and I had volunteered with this woman. I mean, with looking after their kids while they went for counseling. So I knew them already, but I really wanted this particular project to center their narratives. So I spoke to them, interviewed them for like 4 to 5 hours to really understand the kinds of conditions that they were facing in Singapore and how this colored their experience of the legal system. So, I mean, all to say really that every single thing that I did, even in uni, was really geared up in this direction of trying to understand gender equality more, trying to find ways of seeing how this can be advanced in Singapore, right? Because I think one of the big things in this group of women is that they're known as migrant brides, right? So again, their identity is very much a relational identity and tethered to a man. And at that point of time, thankfully things have changed, but at the time that I wrote this work in this thesis in 2012, and these women had to apply for work permits and they were subjected to all the levies before they were able to work, right? And this has since changed, but the issue here is that the narrative, when we think about them, is that they are like passive victims of their circumstances, right? Because some of these women, from hearing their stories, they were actually human trafficked or they had experience working in sex work before. But I think that we need to see them as active agents who are able to change their circumstances once they're given the right levers. So some of the accounts that came out in this thesis, which was eventually published in the Harvard Journal of Law and Gender, was when these women were aware of their rights, when they're aware that domestic violence in Singapore is treated seriously, and you can call the police will come. One of them told me, when my husband beats me, I tell him that I will beat him back, because she's just so empowered. Because previously living in Indonesia, when she was suffering from domestic violence, there was no help that could be given to her. Yeah, but like in this situation, she was so empowered, right? And before that, she was even telling me about how initially, because she's so dependent on her husband getting her, sponsoring her long-term visit pass, that before she went to ICA to get, and she needs his signature, he would actually beat her because he would know that, you can't do anything when you go to ICA because you need my signature, to like sponsor your immigration pass. So you can't even report it, even though there are a lot of law enforcement there. Yeah, so they had a tremendous tolerance for all of these oppressive circumstances because of the lack of legal options. But once they were more empowered and aware of the options available to them, they were able then to use that and wield it, as to change their circumstances and the power dynamics in their marriage.
And not just accept it.
Yeah,
right?
Like another example was this woman who was working. When I met her, she was like, I haven't slept for the past 20 hours. And that she was working like 3 jobs to take care of her 4 kids. Yeah, so she was, and they were all jobs on the informal economy because she couldn't get a work permit, right? So she was a chaperone for Indonesian kids who were like studying in Singapore. She baked and she cleaned houses. And the reason why she had to work so hard was because her husband was not contributing at all. Her Singaporean husband, right? Security guard, but not contributing to the family. And she was paying all the bills.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and in fact, he was using the money and he was going into paying sex workers, etc.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but what she realized, she used the power of the market. She realized that, hey, all these bills, my phone bill, right, electricity bill, even like the rental bill, is all under this guy's name. So if I just stop paying it, they will come after him and he will be forced to pay it.
Oh, good. And good for her.
Yeah, and even her husband was like, wow, like, when did you become so clever? Because, I guess there's a lot of like underestimation of these women because they may not be particularly educated. But again, it was really whatever levers were available to them, using it. And I think that's what my project was, really to recharacterize these women from being seen as just victims to people who can change their circumstances. And when we start seeing them in that way, I think that changes the way that we see them functioning in Singapore society. We see that they can contribute. We see that they are able to, be excellent workers, right? On top of being mums of Singaporean children, and that and hopefully that leads to a path where they are then validated by that PR, right?
Yes, I love that. Wow, that's such a powerful anecdote. And I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
You know, we could go on forever
Yes,
and
yes.
ever, seriously. But one question is, because I was a DPP for a very brief moment in my career, you were a DPP as well for the Sexual Crimes Department.
Yeah.
Does that actually fuel you to empower more women, like outside of work, because of what you see?
Yeah, well, so when I was doing sex crimes prosecution, and I did it for, like 5.5 years total, I think one thing that really struck me is that even though we are in a world where women are so empowered, there is still this scourge of sex crimes that happens, right? And that out of everyone that I prosecuted, and obviously I'm one prosecutor, purely anecdotal, but all the perpetrators were men, and all the victims, they could be women, children, or other men, right? And I think this made me realize that there's something far deeper that is wrong with our society. And this is from years of, broken, oppressive systems of patriarchy. There's a culture around the way that we see women and girls. There's a culture in which men have been trained to wield power in a way that dominates rather than in a way that edifies or in any nurturing way. That all of these terrible things that have just been so embedded into culture, right? And so actually that's what motivates me in my art, because I feel that something like culture is not really changed by laws, right? In fact, law is much further downstream than culture. And I think I want to, in my own small way, create conversations which make people question their assumptions about the way gender dynamics functions in society. And that's what I've been doing through my playwriting. Apart from the 2 plays that I mentioned, Feelings Farm and Psychobitch, I also wrote a play called #Women Supporting Women. And that goes into the theme of sexual assault. And it goes into the themes of different types of feminisms, right? And in fact, even being a millennial versus a Gen Z's form of feminism, right? Where perhaps a millennial brand of feminism, at least to me, it's like, okay, let's try and work within the system, right? Let me be like the partner in the law firm and change the culture for everyone else. Whereas I think what we see with Gen Z is more of like, let's exit the system altogether. Let's call it out. And I wanted to see, in that play, I really explore, 2 different characters who embody different, the intersections of like different identities, right?
Yes.
So one character is a female millennial, first female partner who is a Chinese millennial, and then she ends up in a Zoom room with her intern who's a Malay Gen Z, and there has been a dark secret that's happened between both of them.
I want to watch that play.
Yeah, but I think also to say really that my goal here is to create conversation, right? Because I think that society has just become so much more polarized, and even with social media, right? We're all speaking to our own little echo chambers, and we can curate our content so that we only get things that sit well with us. And there's a lot of outrage actually when we encounter ideas that are outside of our comfort level or what we believe to be right and true. But the thing is that I feel that society doesn't move forward when everyone just sits in their silos and are comfortable, with their ideas of how the world is like, right? Because when you have 2 polarities, the truth is probably somewhere in between, or like, I wouldn't say necessarily truth, but the outcome where society needs to land at needs to involve this contestation and negotiation of ideas, right? And that can happen in many different ways, through politics, for example, but I think it happens through art as well. And the power of art really is that it takes us out of this cerebral mode where we are just so fixed in our logical way of thinking things, and it engages empathy,
Yes.
right? When you see a character and you feel something for that character, in their situation, even though like their politics are completely different from yours, it bypasses the brain and hits you at the heart. And I think that's what we need to do in society in general. We need to see people as humans. We need to see people as carrying all these traumas and wounds that leads them to a particular worldview. And we need to have empathy. And that's how we can start dialogue, right? And that's what I aim to do in all the art that I create.
Yes. Thanks for sharing all that. Last night, I watched this video of you and you declared in this interview with Her World Women magazine when you won Her World Young Achiever of the Year award that your vision for Singapore is a society where there is space for everyone's stories to be received with compassion and that there's grace for all of us to live out our questions. Yeah, so I thought whatever you just said, you are living out your vision, and I want to acknowledge you for all your efforts that you have made and all the strides you have made. I have one final question I'll be remiss in not asking because my sister, Paige, who will definitely be listening to this, she's the one who encouraged me, amongst many others, to come and reach out to you for this podcast. So I'm really grateful that you made time for this. So her question is about your mum, Alison. And Alison is someone you wrote about in your poem in the poetry book. So if Alison, your mum, didn't give up her career in banking to be a homemaker to you and your 3 siblings, do you think you would have turned out differently?
Wow, that's such an interesting question. And, you know, I'm very cautious in answering this, right? Because I feel that every woman has their own journey. And, you know, even when I chose to speak about my mom at the Her World Young Woman Achiever Award at my speech, right, receiving the award, because I actually felt that I didn't want I wanted people to realize that there were so many different ways of being a woman and that actually achievement is not measured in how many stages or accolades that you win. But what I learned from my mother is it really is in the impact that you create in wherever that you are placed and the love that you show the world, right? And I think that for my mom, you know, I'm very grateful that she chose this path, right, of being a homemaker. But I also fully recognize that, you know, for example, if I had kids, right, I wouldn't be a homemaker, you know, like to be perfectly honest. And that's not like the gold standard of being a mother. But I think my mom, you know, she's someone who really felt called to be a homemaker. And again, in that poem in my book, she supported all our passions, right? Like my brother was a national water polo player, right? He played Sea Games water polo, you know, and that involved obviously a lot of training and my mom having to send him, right? My sister also, she used to be a national swimmer when she was in school, right? And all of that involved a lot of early wake-ups. And I think that, you know, without a mom who was able to be at home and present, that would not have happened, right? It would be very hard for us. Unless, you know, I guess there are other solutions around it, right? Like, for example, you could get someone to drive your kids. But I think also that, my mom actually taught me a lot about, wherever your sphere of influence is, to be able to live out love, right? And walk in love wherever you are, right? And so for her, you know, she actually would, it would just be on the level of her neighbors, right? Or as I told you, like all the women that I interviewed were her friends, right? The women with the HIV, like she never had any boundaries as to who is her friend and she was always ready to help. And I think that's something that I would try to do even as a lawyer. You know, if I have a full-time job, like I still want to live my life in a way that is oriented towards other people.
Yes. Yeah. And you have done that. You have done that. And your mom is hilarious because I see your IG stories. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people have. And she's just very authentic too. Yeah. So there must have been a way that she has influenced you to be the person you are today. So well done, Auntie Alison. Okay, so Amanda, let everyone get to know you a bit better. Okay. We'll get to the rapid fire round of questions. What's your morning routine like?
There's no routine because like I wake up, I immediately call my Grab, okay? And then however much time the Grab takes to come, that is going to be the level of my makeup. So if it's 3 minutes, okay, no, just like, okay, nothing, no time because I need to brush my teeth and change my clothes.
No breakfast?
No, I don't eat breakfast.
Wow.
And then if it's 9 minutes, then it's like, oh, I can put my makeup. Yeah, so it's like, you know, like when you see my face in my office, like how much time I had for the Grab to come.
I see.
Yeah.
And what's your favorite food?
I love carrot cake. As in like the Asian chai
Black
tow
or
kueh, black.
Yeah,
Okay.
me too. It has to be the black. And favorite Taylor Swift song?
All Too Well, 10-minute version.
Nice. And where are the top 3 places where you buy your clothes? I'm catching you by surprise. Yeah.
Okay, Tria the Label is what I'm wearing
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Love them. I love Benito, obviously.
Yes.
How can you be a Singaporean OL if you do not buy Love Benito?
Absolutely.
And I really like Ong Shamgam as well.
Yeah, which I'm wearing today.
Yeah.
And she's actually a classmate of mine from law school. Okay, and what do you do when you have difficulty focusing?
Scroll TikTok.
Really?
Yes.
That helps.
No, it does not help lah. It's just a way of blanking out my brain.
I see. So when you lack inspiration, what do you do?
Scroll TikTok.
Okay, got it. And which book have you reread the most?
I don't reread books because I feel life is too short. I don't rewatch movies because life is too short. Yeah. I feel like the only book I reread is the Bible lah.
Yeah. Okay, wow. And what are you looking forward to the most for the rest of 2024?
What I'm looking forward to the most is that Psychobitch is going to Edinburgh.
Nice!
Yeah, we're taking the show to Edinburgh.
Wow,
yeah.
when is that happening?
It's going to happen in August.
Oh, wow, that's very soon. Oh, okay, those in Edinburgh, you're in for a treat. And what is the first word that comes to mind when I say the word bar?
Dive bar on the east side, where you at? Swifties will get it, okay? It's from Delicate.
Oh, nice. And what is your favorite poem from your book, Professions?
I think it would have to be Monsoon Girls because that's the one I wrote for my friend.
And do you mind reading it for everyone?
It's very long leh.
Okay,
I read the last part
one
lah.
part. Yes, read one part.
What remains of us after the rain? We who spent ourselves like water, falling headlong for what would not yield to us, despite our hunger, our desperate descents. Every girl a graveyard of forgotten names, dull tones, and hours misplaced, dangling filaments of insatiable questions. All that is left, heat that dulls the wet asphalt, puddles lifting like a bruise, the memory of our faces lashed with rain, staring defiant into newborn sun till it is mirrored in our swimming eyes.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, I'm glad. Me too, I had fun. And I'm sure a lot of listeners had fun listening to our chat. If you've enjoyed this, I'm sure you have, then share it with all your friends, your family, the women and the bros who need to listen to this. And tune in next time to find out what could be in store for us after the bar. See you! Thank you once again, Amanda, for joining us for today's episode. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below if you're tuning in via YouTube. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. For those on Spotify, be sure to click that follow button and give us a 5-star rating. We would really love it if you could share this episode with your friends, your family, and your colleagues so they can also join this growing community too. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next episode of After the Bar.